Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. It feels like everyone at some point has the same question. Am I on track with my retirement savings? How much should I have saved by now? The problem is there isn't one perfect answer. Even the experts don't agree. A lot of materials we see out there from Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, JP Morgan Chase are all attempts to answer that question. But remember, these checkpoints are created by humans. And these humans are influenced by the companies they work for, by their own experiences, and the assumptions they have to make when writing for the masses, not individuals. We have JP Morgan Chase. Now their approach is kind of interesting because rather than anchoring it to, say, a specific multiple like Fidelity or a range like T. Rowe Price, instead their benchmark is tied to a specific dollar amount. The fine print is really important here. They assume that you're saving 5% of your income if your income is $90,000 a year or less, and that you're saving 10% of your income if your income is $100,000 a year or more. They look at household spending data, inflation, and market returns to project what that savings path turns into over time. If you save 5%, the checkpoints are smaller early on, but the growth depends heavily on compounding doing the work. If you save 10%, the numbers increase faster, but your retirement picture looks much more secure. If you start later, you very well may have to increase your savings rate to 20%, 25%, or more simply because you have catching up to do. This makes their chart feel much more accessible. If you make $100,000, you can see right on the table, here's how much you should have by the age of 40, by 50, and by 60. It feels achievable, and for many households, it's a really useful starting point. There is a catch. Maybe a 5% savings rate isn't right for everyone. Many financial planners would assume that this is a very low savings rate, where you find recommendations traditionally in the industry around 15 or 20%. But if you start incredibly early and you invest consistently throughout the course of your entire career, if you expect lower spending in retirement, if you go into retirement completely debt-free, if you have a stronger Social Security payment, you might be just fine with a 5% savings rate. But it certainly does depend on your situation, and I will add the caveat of it's much better to go into retirement with a little bit too much in investments than it is to go into retirement with a little bit too little. Let's compare savings by age with a $50,000 income and a $100,000 income. Remember, the $50,000 income earner is going to be targeting a 5% savings rate. The $100,000 income earner is going to be targeting a 10% savings rate. At a 5% savings rate, the $50,000 earner ends up with around $350,000 at retirement, which may be enough for some households, especially if they have modest expenses and strong Social Security benefits. But notice this 5% savings rate reflects a lower account balance by the age of retirement. If we use the other models, they were going for a 15% savings rate regardless of income. Now, whether or not that fits you, that depends on your situation, but this does ultimately reflect a lower account balance by the time you get to retirement. On the other hand, Fidelity was recommending 10x savings, and T. Rowe Price reflected a much higher range, so we do see a much lower balance here for a modest income earner. But look at that $100,000 earner saving 10%. They finish with about $1.25 million, which lands much closer to Fidelity and T. Rowe Price benchmarks. Savings rate matters just as much as income, and it absolutely will affect how much you end up with at retirement. And remember, if you start saving and investing later in life, it's very unlikely that you're going to get away with a 5 or a 10% savings rate. These benchmarks really work if you start right out of the gate, right when you graduate high school, and continue throughout the course of your entire working career. The pros of Chase's model is that it's really easy to follow. You get clear dollar checkpoints with every single age and every single income. It is grounded in real-life spending data. The numbers they give are based on how households actually spend, not just theoretical models. And for many, it can feel accessible. Quite frankly, a 5 or a 10% savings rate can feel doable for many households. Now, on the flip side, the cons are that 5% or 10% very well could be too low. If you want more security or flexibility on when you're able to retire, you very well may have to save more, especially if you got a late start to investing. The catch-up math can be brutal. If you fail to stay consistent with your savings plan, not saving that 5 or 10% consistently, you very likely might have to ramp that investing rate way up later on in your career just to hit the target. Now let's put everything together and compare what these numbers would look like for a household with a $100,000 income. Here's what each company says you should have saved at different ages. Fidelity, at the age of 40, $300,000 invested. T. Rowe Price, $200,000 to $400,000. JP Morgan Chase, just $150,000. By the time we get to retirement, Fidelity recommends $1 million invested, T. Rowe Price a range of $750,000 to $1.35 million, and JP Morgan on the lower end at $850,000 invested. Notice the difference. Fidelity is the most aggressive. They want to see you at 10x by retirement. JP Morgan is much more conservative, and T. Rowe Price, maybe they're a flexible middle ground, depending on where you fall in the range. So what's the right answer? Honestly, there isn't one. These are tools, not hard and fast rules. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it does, and I think it's useful to remember. If you want aggressive, you can go for Fidelity, and this will give you a stretch goal. If you want more flexibility and you want a range, well, maybe you go with T. Rowe Price. If you simply want easy dollar targets, go with Chase. And honestly, why not mix and match a bit? Maybe use Fidelity as your stretch goal and Chase as your floor. You can track your progress against T. Rowe Price to get a more balanced view. The key here is that you want to be saving consistently throughout the course of your entire working career and working towards financial freedom. But there is no one right path and there is no one right answer. These are just to be used as a general guide to help you know if you're on the right track.